Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing another video on a woman in fitness history. I had previously done a video on Abby Pudgy Stockton, and I kind of wanted to do her counterpart slash predecessor from across the pond, Ivy Russell. Now, there's not a whole ton of information out there on Ivy Russell. She was born in 1907. It was very early. Not a lot of records were kept just in general, unless you were a especially famous person, and women's sports was just not a topic a lot of people cared about, so not a lot of information is out there on her, but I'm going to share what I could find. This is a mixture of newspaper articles, research centers that have information on her, and I'm just kind of compiling it together as best as I can. There's also at times some kind of conflicting information, especially when it came to the various records that she set as far as like weights. Some sources will say one thing and other sources will say another, so I'm just kind of trying to be as accurate as possible, but I just want to put that out there. So Ivy was born in 1907 in Surrey, England. She only weighed about 3 pounds when she was born and spent much of her childhood very sickly. She suffered from many illnesses, and by the time she was 14 she was asthmatic and on the verge of having tuberculosis. I'm not entirely sure what it means to be on the verge of having tuberculosis, but I assume it just meant that she was very sickly. And tired of being sick and feeling weakly, she decided to change that, and she sought help from a man by the name of E.A. Streeter. He was a well-known physical culturist of the day, as well as a retired military trainer. Physical culture was a movement that started in the 19th century. It was kind of the predecessor to today's fitness industry. It talked a lot about the benefits of living an active lifestyle, healthy eating, just healthy habits in general, and the dangers of living a sedentary lifestyle. Streeter firmly believed that many illnesses could be treated, if not completely cured, through physical activity, and in Ivy's case, he would be correct. He started her off lightly with deep breathing exercises, light jogging, and as she continued to improve, he would add more strenuous activities such as gymnastics and boxing. By the time she was 16, she had pretty much cured everything that she had been suffering from. It was under Streeter's tutelage that she would first begin to perform, and he would also be the first person to really recognize the unusual level of strength that she had, especially for a woman of her day. He would often give her the most difficult positions in the gymnastics performances. She was often the bottom of the human pyramid, at times holding up to 6 other people on her shoulders. In her late teens, she also began having an interest in weightlifting, which, as I've discussed before, was something unusual for the time period. Strenuous physical activity was seen as unseemly for women and also potentially dangerous. People had this misconception that it could harm a woman's reproductive health. We now of course know that this is not the case, except in very extreme circumstances. At 18 years old and weighing in at 126 pounds, Ivy would perform a few lifts that we have on record, namely a clean and jerk that she lifted 176 pounds, and then she would do that again about 5 years later, weighing in at 134 pounds. She would do that with 193 pounds, as well as doing a deadlift. I saw 400 pounds, but I'm not certain how accurate that is. If that is the case, I'm extra impressed because I looked at records of women today in her same weight class, and she's lifting very close to what current record holders are. Not like world record holders, of course, but other champions in her weight class, and that is with modern training, modern equipment, modern nutrition. So it really makes me wonder what she could have accomplished if she was alive today and also had access to those things. In 1932, she decided to put a challenge out to Tilly Tinmouth, who was at that time the strongest woman in her weight class in Britain. The weight class was 9 stone, which is about 126 pounds or 57 kilograms. Now, this contest would not be sanctioned. The British Amateur Weightlifting Association actually actively discouraged it. They feared negative press, and they also believed that weightlifting was dangerous for women. But in spite of this, on April 13th, the women would go forward with the contest. They would perform 4 lifts each, and it would be Ivy who would come out on top. Now, I found a news article that talked about it, but they didn't list all of the weights that the ladies lifted, but it was the deadlift that was the final lift, and Ivy's deadlift was 300 pounds and Tilly's was 250. So sources say she won by quite a bit of a margin. However, I did want to point out that Tilly had to travel quite a ways for this contest, whereas Ivy did not, so Ivy was much more well rested, and that probably had an impact on both of their performances, but I'm not entirely certain. Now, this contest actually drew quite the audience. There was quite a bit of press there, and I saw somewhere about 2,000 people were watching. So after she won, she was given the official title of Amateur Weightlifting Champion, as well as an unofficial title of Britain's Strongest Woman. And she used this positive press and publicity to petition to have the BAWLA allow women to be members, as well as to sanction their contests. She wrote a letter in Health and Strength magazine just addressing the fears and misconceptions around women's weightlifting, and to also call out the hypocrisy. She stated,
"Regarding the alleged evil effects of weightlifting on women, let me say this. It is a pity that some of these scaremongers and old Mother Hubbards don't try to prevent working girls from lifting heavy weights that are awkward to get a hold of and, moreover, the lifting of which is compulsory in their everyday work. These hard-working girls, in the course of their duties, take far more risks than I ever shall, because they are not trained to perform their tasks with the minimum of strain and output of energy."
Ivy pointed out that in their everyday lives, many women were lifting heavy objects. Oftentimes these were cumbersome and difficult, and it was something they had to do for their jobs, and nobody had a problem with that, so why did they have a problem with them weightlifting? She also pointed out that not allowing women to be members would not prevent them from weightlifting. It would just keep them from having access to the proper training and equipment, and could likely result in injuries, and that this would be what made the BAWLA look bad, not the women weightlifting. And it would take a few years, but they would fold and they would start allowing female membership as well as sanctioning women's contests. After her success in weightlifting, in order to continue to challenge herself, Ivy would move on to women's wrestling. She had very similar experiences in wrestling that she did when she was doing weightlifting, in that female wrestlers were looked at in a negative light. They had a hard time getting events together, especially in comparison to their male counterparts. So once again, she used her positive public view to write more letters and address the various fears and misconceptions around the sport to work on legitimizing it. In 1934, she would add another title to her belt when she would challenge then women's wrestling champion Peggy Parnell to a match. She would beat her in 9.5 minutes. So now she is weightlifting champion and a women's wrestling champion. She continued to defend her various titles and compete in more contests. She continued to fight diligently to legitimize women's sports up until her retirement. Unfortunately, in 1939, she would be in a pretty serious car accident. One other person in the car with her would die, and she would sustain some serious injuries. And it was kind of after this point that she really started to fade out of the spotlight. I imagine the injuries that she received during this accident had an impact on her performance. There was still some other smaller things that she would compete in. She still appeared in the press, was still working towards getting the sports recognized for women, but it was not quite to the extent prior to that accident. Something else to take note of in Ivy Russell's case is that she introduced a different idea of what a strong woman looked like. Prior to her, most strong women who lifted weights were big. They were tall and heavier set women, whereas Ivy was of average height, thinking about 5'5" from what I could tell, maybe a little under that. And then her physique was quite lean. She received much praise for her physique, and then in the contest against Tilly, the newspapers actually commented on how the fact that they didn't have huge knotted muscles. So she still fit into the idea of what a feminine woman looks like. Now, she did have her hair cut fairly short and she never wore makeup, but people didn't look at her as masculine. They still saw her as feminine, which was different from what they had seen previously. She would also never marry. There was one rumor of an engagement at one point in her life, but it wasn't true. I think she fairly quickly nipped that one in the bud, and she would never have children. She did cite her own childhood illnesses as their reason for not wanting kids, which is perfectly understandable. Ivy's name is unfortunately not one that is well known today. Like I said earlier in the video, there's not a lot of information out there on her, and people just don't know who she is, which is really sad because she was a major contributing factor towards the legitimization of women's sports. She worked her whole life making it so that those who would come after her could compete and could get the same level of training and recognition as their male counterparts. If you enjoyed this video, if you could just leave me a like, maybe a comment if you're feeling generous, to help, of course, grow my channel so other people can find my content. If you would like to see more of my videos, if you could hit the subscribe button. And if you feel like helping support my channel, I do have a Patreon linked in my bio. It's just a single tier, whatever the absolute lowest is. And thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.